Good evening, everyone, and welcome to EduTALK. EduTALK is a weekly virtual talk show created out of the need for a global learning community focused on topics in education that directly impact Caribbean nations and diaspora nationals working across the globe. EduTALK features teachers, principals, administrators, business leaders, and dignitaries who share their expertise in education with a common goal of moving education forward and our students upwards. Today, we are still joined by our CFO, Mrs. Judy Villeneuve-Dyce. And of course, Dr. Barker is here, my co-host, partner in crime. Dr. Barker is the Chief Academic Officer. And so welcome again, Judy. Dr. Barker, take over because I know you haven't been here last week with the first part of this Caribbean African diaspora series, which is reconstructing Black history. Yes.
Reconstructing.
Yes. We are
You have been there already, with the word reconstructing. Let me understand what you mean by reconstructing, sir.
All right, so let us talk a little bit about it because Judy gave us a really good, well, quite a few different parts to it last week, but reconstructing meaning that what we're doing, and I'm sure you're very knowledgeable about this. You're a stalwart in the description and the explanation of these things, from an academic perspective to one social. But to look at race in a different light, because sometimes or most times we talk about Black history from the point of a few people who have made tremendous contributions to Black history over the years. And we usually start from slavery or from the 1960s. So to reconstruct the history of Black people is to look back on times before slavery of Black people, because slavery does not define them. It affected us all, Black people and people of color, but it doesn't define our true purpose here on earth. And so we look back to our ancestral line, our lineage from Africa, from the Caribbean, from America, people who came to the Americas as travelers and people who settle with other people doing business and so on long before slavery. So people were here before. So we talk about that last week in our first episode, and Judy here, eloquent as she is, explained quite a bit. We talk about Sir Henry Clark, who is Judy's what is that, Judy? Your
my grand uncle. Yeah, that's civil rights leader.
Very, very prominent civil rights leader. And so we talk about the Moors in Europe and so on.
Yeah.
We want to talk about how do we fit this into our present education system? If we're going to reconstruct Black history, Black History Month,
Let me quickly jump in. There are two. One of them is Jamaica's a famous dub poet, Muta Baruka.
Yeah.
He has a term. He say slavery isn't Black history. Slavery interrupted Black history.
Yes. Yeah. Very good.
That's one way he described it.
That's powerful.
That one's very good.
Yeah, so that's one thing that he said. Yeah. I'm just, while you're talking, I was looking on my bookshelf because I have a book that it's called They Came Before Columbus by Ivan B. Sertima.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
And I'm checking because I have it. I'm just looking to see if I can pick it out with my aging eyes from the bookshelf over there. And I'm sure I have it over there. And I read that book. It's a powerful book. And it does help to. It's funny you come across these books because these books are never in the curriculum for people to have this information and then be able to decide whether they want to believe it or not. What you have is these things don't fit the narrative. The Pinta, the Nina, the Santa Maria doesn't fit that narrative. And so what you have is they talk about it, his story. And that's why it's called history, rather than my story. So there is a need to reconstruct is a word I'm playing with, but there's a need to look at Black history in a more wholesome way rather than through a single lens.
Yes, the danger of a single story. Yeah. You know, one of the things that we want to, and we're grappling with it too, you know, all of us, and people who are watching and responding, they can respond too, because we value comments and input. But to look at after you figured out that this thing that they taught us in school is not our story. What do we do with the facts? What do we do with the information that we get from not the victor's perspective, but the victims? And in this case, of course, the people who were enslaved, they're victims. But as you said, slavery disrupted Black history. So when we figured out that, oh, we kind of like came off our path when we're building something, what do we do with all of this information? How do we reconstruct then our system of information dispersion to students, our sharing of information? How do we incorporate that in our system that we have now? Because we have systems that are fully established. Judy?
Well, I mean, the fact is that it has to be intentional. A lot of us are living in systems and not really understanding the full impact that it has on us. I always think about the story of a frog interviewing a fish. And he says, you know, I'm really thinking about, I can live in the water, I can live outside, but I really am looking into the living this in water. So tell me a little bit about your experience. Where do you get your food? You tell him where he got his food. Okay, so where do you put your eggs? Told him where he put his eggs. Okay, so and your family? Oh, you tell him where he keeps his family in the water. And so how do you sleep? You know, I don't sleep so much. He said, okay, so what's it like being in water? And the fish said, what water? And oftentimes you find yourself in a situation where you're surrounded by something so pervasively that you don't realize that you're in it. So I think that we have to really be able to see, and oftentimes you have to travel, you have to step back, you have to see other societies. I think you know, trips to Africa are very, very helpful, just to be able to see yourself from the outside, looking at where you are and being able to come back and be more critical about what it is that you're experiencing. Our dependence on public school has become our Achilles heel in a sense, because in the United States in particular, the most successful people of African descent that were here after slavery were the ones that were taught in their own communities by their own teachers in their own neighborhoods, right? And this idea of this fantasy about getting equality as a result of getting into a shared environment where you were going to be with people of the society or part of that community that received all the benefits, clearly did not end up being the case, right? So we have to really find a way to redefine ourselves, you know, in a sense of where is our family, where's our community, where's the education happening in our homes. It's important to know the other pieces because you have to be able to develop critical thinking skills, you have to be able to compare. But if that's the only message that you have is what the dominant society is telling you, then you have nothing to compare it to. I think it's very important that we rebuild our families in a very traditional sense, and in doing so, educating ourselves. But what we have a problem with is the society, at least here in the United States. I don't know if it's that way in England, but we're such consumers that we're becoming very superficial. We're losing that substance. We're thinking that the more that we have, the more that we're like everybody else, and we're achieving ourselves in a societal way, in a financial way, and therefore we've made it. But what we are finding out at the same time is that our children are growing up on sand. They don't have the foundation that they had before to know who they are. And that leaves them vulnerable to, unfortunately, repeating history. And so we want to avoid that at all costs.
Yeah.
Barca, is that what it is happening? It's like in your neck of the woods in Europe, where the grading of the outlets for information is there any backbone in family structure to say that this is what our people believe, this is what you need to go there and do among other people, this is what our ancestors used to do, you need to represent us? That's what my grandmother used to tell me, you know, represent us. When you go there, you represent us. You represent this lineage. Know where you come from. You know
where you come from.
Yeah.
That's a very powerful. I'm going to quote another Muta Baruka. You know, Muta Baruka used to say that if a cow bought into a pig pen, him says it's a cow, you know, him still going to say more. It doesn't matter. And him just say when Jamaicans and Americans and everyone get confused about whether they're Africans or not, it's just a difference in where you're born, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
It still is.
Very
So
good.
it might be the powerful ways him say a cow born inside of a pig pen, he said a cow, you know. Still I go say more. So it no matter where you're born, it determines where you are, who you are. I know in funny them ways, but you know, some people have a way of expressing some very powerful thoughts through simple examples. And it's a gift, you know. And one of the ways in which I try to live life is use those examples and actually cite those people in order to understand the world. So it's a powerful one. I suppose the UK black scenario is totally different from the African American experience in you know, UK doesn't have let's say a physical plantation experience on the island. You know, while people would be generations away from living on a plantation, UK is different. UK's black, UK's blacks largely are Caribbean descent who are emigrating, colonization in reverse. When you talk about Louis Bennett saying colonization in reverse, meaning people going back to the motherland, so to speak. Fatherland now, if you think about it. But you know, the that is the experience. It's different, and so what you find, it's not unusual to be talking to UK black people, and you know they have to kind of change the terminology here. Now they used to say BAME, Black and Minority Ethnic. I was doing some writings the other day, and I realized that they have changed it now to say people from a Black Caribbean background. That's the terminology in the UK. Yeah, UK government writings. They don't use the BAME terminology anymore.
Wow.
Which, in one sense, explains some things because the government defines who we are through those terms. We are not really in charge of those definers. We aren't. It's not like a group lobbied and said this is a better way to say who we are. It's normally through a group of a think tank. And you just go on and they say, oh, I mean, but yeah, it's a different experience here because it would be unusual to talk to a UK born black person. And they would say to you, they can't wait to go back home. And home for them represents Jamaica, maybe a country they have never visited. You know, but their parents, they grew up with immigrant parents who never saw the country as home. Then they come, they don't see it as home. Then their kids hear them speaking of this, they don't see it as home. So that kind of permanence hardly exists here. And it represents itself through youth defiance because they don't feel like they're part of the country. They're never educated to be a part of the country. So there's a lot there, you know. So I don't have to go into how the education system would not even acknowledge that.
Yeah, we have talked about that quite a bit, even last year and the year before. You know, but we're still waiting for some change to happen. With the onset of so many different things, we find out that nowadays the focus is on Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. A lot of conferences around diversity, equity, belonging, and inclusion. And we're figuring out that the content of those conferences is just to celebrate what is on the surface of things. It's not to go back and pull some wisdom or pull some factual information to the forefront and say, let me teach you who you were or how your parents were and the generation that you come from in order to empower people over the long term. It's just to have like it's sort of like a jolt of excitement about my color. And it's just based on my color, and that's all. I am Black and proud. But why are you proud? Because I could be white and proud too. I could be gay and proud, straight and proud. Black lives matter, white lives matter too. I'm proud and be proud. You know, but the idea of this historical significance of Black people and treat the 1 month. By the way, I'm not with this idea of celebrating Black history for 1 month. I don't really agree with that 100%, because we limit ourselves to this month. Every single time we label something and say, let's focus on it this time. They don't focus on it any other time. It's just this. And I have experience of it too, you know. But so what I'm saying is, this idea of history and making it what it's supposed to be for education. It's supposed to be like what, let me start quoting somebody like, you know, Dr. Barker, where Bob Marley quoted this from is, you know, a tree without roots, you'll perish if you don't understand where you're coming from. And that's what history is supposed to be. And so what do we say? And I'm pointing this to Judy so we can go around here. What do we say about the history that's supposed to be carried forth? Because history is not the past. History is the present and the past and what is going to happen. That is history. So how do we communicate this to our young people?
Well, to me, history is important, but it's the continuum, right? It's the continuum of all that we are, who we are now, and who we intend to be. Because you can't, I mean, think of project management. You can't really plan if you don't know where you're going. And that's the ultimate goal, is to know where you're headed. History is only to help you to get there, to navigate roads that have already been traveled in a way that you benefit from that wisdom. And that's the problem, is you have people, as you could say, reinventing the wheel. And I want to just go back to what you were saying earlier, this whole movement about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Unfortunately, the primary way in which it's being promoted is very divisive. And it's being used exactly, I agree entirely, in a very superficial way. And it's almost like, I call it a soapbox phenomenon. Now I get my opportunity to be out here and tell you how great I am because I've been listening to you all this time, and this is my way of getting back at you somewhere, without, as you said, tapping into the deeper conversation. And that deeper conversation would be more inclusive. And that's one of the things that I was talking about just the other day. There is slavery, the idea of it, first of all, not all people of African descent were enslaved. Most of them weren't, because most of them are still on the continent of Africa. And abuse and what do you call it? Exploitation is not the same thing as slavery. So, but we do have a slave history with other nations, even in Russia and in Eastern Europe. The fact is it was between the 500s and the 1400s, they were the ones that were enslaved across the European nations. It was very few Africans at all. That changed after the 1400s, right? And there became this whole movement in that direction. But the history is, we need to understand that slavery has always been an economic system, and stop, hoarding the idea of slavery as if Blacks own it and own it alone. To me, I have a problem with that personally. But one of the things I was mentioning the other day to someone because they said, oh, well, Haiti is treated so badly all the time. And I said, obviously the US and Europe has decided that they're going to punish Haiti. And then I realized they didn't understand the fact that Haiti was the country not only that started freedom of all slave countries by their first successful revolution, but what they didn't know is that Napoleon had actually borrowed some of the Polish legion to go there and fight on behalf of France, and they identified, empathized, because they themselves were abused and were being persecuted by Europe, decided that they would defect and join the Haitians in fighting against the French. So the Haiti did not win on its own. It won with about 7,000 Polish people supporting them. And see, these are the pieces of history that we miss. The pieces of history that connect us are the oppression, the economic goals that different countries have had all along, obviously, in order to improve themselves, and they have divided us, artificially by race. But it's always been about income. It's always been about resources, and so now, since we don't understand our history, we all are taking ownership of this slave history as if everybody who's dark skinned has always been a slave and nobody else has. And then they get to hide their history and exclude themselves as never having had that same identity. And this is a human history that we need to be tapping into. We need to always understand upfront what our relationship is with the rest of the world. I was really happy to see that in Tahiti, these were African people. When you think of Tahitians, you think of people that are Asian looking or whatever, but they have a revival right now. I was so happy to see it, to give respect to their bush. They have afros and they're doing beauty pageants so that the girls will start to wear their natural hair and wear their afros. And I had never associated them with an African past. I knew they had wide noses and wide faces, but I don't know why I didn't associate it with them. But they themselves have now decided that everybody needs to know that this is who they are and that they have nothing to be afraid of. And as far as you go back to other nations, you will see that Africans have been there all along. We've infiltrated so many societies. There's a whole history of Africans in Ireland because of the fact that Ireland was suppressed by England, and they were moving around all of the people that they were suppressing. So these are things that we need to know, because that will help us to know ourselves, not just the Black history, but to know human history.
Yeah.
Barker?
Yeah. No, it's our biggest challenge in all of this is most of the information that there's no new information being unearthed. All the information has been present even when we were taught a sanitized version of history. And all of the information is also easily available, even when we were being taught a sanitized version. It wasn't a case where they were locked in a vault somewhere and we couldn't access it. You could go to any reputable library in the world and you'd have found all of the texts and the books that have questioned and provided alternative views of the history of people, humans in general, as well as accounts and additional journals and diary entries and recordings of events that happened that would have changed our perspectives of them. Always available. It was never a case where you couldn't have it. What you had was an education system that had cherry-picked what it wanted. Now, the question is why? Why would your education system have access to all the information but choose to package a history and then teach that to both let's say their indigenous people and the so-called minorities, right? Why do they teach it together? So first of all, think about curriculum development. You're going to find that there's a decision that has to be taken. What is the purpose?
Yeah, sure.
What's the purpose of this curriculum? Why do we learn history? Why do we learn math? Why do we learn science? What is there? If you think about math, we teach math. Why do we learn math? Kids ask us all the time, why do I have to learn this? Because I'm not going to use algebra, The other day, there's no situation I can think of, that. And so when you're teaching algebra, the kids say to you, why do you have to learn algebra?
Yes.
What your answer to that, Dr. Dyce?
I would say, yeah, well, I showed them an example. I usually use my grandfather with measurement and trying to solve my grandfather built a house by himself. So he usually talk about the equation, like you need to balance this or that, and if one side is lacking something, what do you need from the other side to make sure that it's over here? So I use my grandfather a lot. In a nutshell, that's what I do with algebra. And if
Okay.
you mention it, because recently I've had students talk to me about literally algebra. They can actually see the application of geometry, but when it comes on to equations and so on, they tend to, because it's more abstract. They tend to. So
Okay.
one
There's a
one
reason behind it. I think the
yeah,
point is there's a bigger reason beyond the facts why
yeah,
it is taught.
yes,
Right? So in math, we are not necessarily teaching them algebra to apply algebra. We're teaching them other skills that algebra allow us to develop in them.
mhm,
Like
mhm,
the ability to recognize that problems can be solved by looking at it from different ways,
yes,
or the ability to think in a certain kind of mindset. So following procedures, algorithms as well, algebra allows that attention to detail, those kind of things.
yeah,
Now, if we can do that to math, I wonder, what's the purpose of history in the curriculum? What is it that it is supposed to achieve?
mhm,
When you say the diet that students have to learn, history, geography, math, science, blah, blah. When you take history into the curriculum, the question is, when it is in it, and the curriculum designers are thinking in a big picture, what is the purpose of history? What is it supposed to teach the kids, right? Obviously, it's not facts, because facts can change. If I live in Russia, the history is different, the content is different,
mhm,
right? If I live in Jamaica, our history is different from what you taught in America or UK. So the question is, what are the deeper un, unmapped skills that we might not know that someone has decided must be what the purpose of history is? Because that's the underlying point here.
mhm, yeah,
Once you understand what that is, then you'll understand why certain things are taught certain ways
mhm,
and
yeah,
why certain information would not need to be there because it might not achieve the goals of the
Mhm.
history curriculum.
yeah,
Yes, yes.
I used to say, when I came to England, I used to say something is wrong with the system. And I used to think that I was able to identify the 10 or 15 things that were wrong with the system. And we would think of grandiose ways in which we could fix them.
mhm,
And then one day it dawned on me that the system is by design. It is the design. It's not a flaw.
mhm,
It's not a bug. It's
yeah.
not, it's not a bug in the system. It is the program.
It's
I love
totally
that.
designed.
It's
You walk
true.
around in our schools and you see it. It's exactly achieving what it's supposed to achieve.
It's a program. It's not a bug. We look at it and think it's a bug.
True.
No, and so coming back to your point, right? Because when I say it is the program, if it is the program, the only way you can because you see when you say it's a bug, you try to debug it, you try to fix a particular part of it and say that will be fine. Yeah,
Yeah.
it will work now. But you still keep the program. Now the only way you can undo a program, is either you go into your system and you delete it and you have to go in all of the files them that it touched. Imagine having a program on a computer and every time you delete it, sometimes you start the computer and you just restart it again. And you say,
Yeah.
but me not think me deleted the other day. And somebody said, no, you have to go down into the list of file and
Yeah.
take out this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm,
So you can deprogram it.
mhm. Yeah, I
Yeah.
like that. I like that analogy of the system, because that's exactly what it's achieving. And what you said there, Barker, I don't really want you to go too far from that, because it's exactly what is happening. What you said about what they teach, because they want to sustain something.
There's a specific goal in
Yeah.
what is in the curriculum. It's not
Yeah.
random. It's specific. You see, if you want to know how much it is designed, try and change something. Let's try. Let's try and say, maybe we should take out this unit and put this in. Try.
Mhm.
Let's try.
Unless
Yeah.
It's true.
Well,
You know,
You
but
realize how,
sorry, go ahead.
yeah. No, no, you go, sorry.
No, I love the visual. I'm thinking about it, you know, and it's true when you try to go up against any system, the system is self-serving and it's regenerating for itself, for its own self-preservation, like any
Yeah,
machine. And so when I think about those apocalyptic movies where you have this really sophisticated society and all these buildings and streets and things like that, and then something happens. And no matter what, if everything stops, the plants start to grow out. They start it starts to take back what was there in the first place. And
yeah,
so I like to imagine that we have these little pockets in society that are outside of the system that allow us to, to grow. And we just have to find those areas that of neglect that they aren't really paying attention to. Our smallest communities, our, like I said, our homes, our people that we have something in common with. We really need to find those spaces where we can
yeah,
allow ourselves to grow, because there's just everywhere is just cemented. It's purposely put that way so that we cannot express ourselves. And
yeah,
but it's not impossible, because even the biggest societies can be brought down, right? By nature, whatever the case may be. So we know that there's always hope. And unless you are educated, you won't know that there's hope. It can feel very overwhelming, the system, and you can feel like that's the only place you can be to thrive. I had a conversation with somebody about a year ago, because in the United States, people of African descent are the highest educated, or the most educated.
yeah.
And here it is, we're getting all this education because we're trying to work within systems that don't necessarily want us, but we want to be able to show that we're worthy and come in with enough information to be in order to thrive in that environment. And then once you're in there, you realize that your counterparts, your white counterparts, or whatever else that are in there, are far less educated, far less informed and prepared, but yet they have more likelihood to have power and influence. They have their system, their connections and relationships already established. And that you're constantly, as a person of color, outside of not being from inside the system, constantly proving yourself every day, regardless of how much you do. Every day is a new day that you need to establish your worth and your ability to be able to remain there, where they don't have to do that. So that exhausting treadmill that you run on and to stay within a European system is not necessarily conducive to us being able to be our best selves either. So I think it's very important to have conversations like this and opportunities like this that we create
yeah,
to be able to share this information. Because where are we going to have that conversation? Not at work. You can't
yeah,
talk about things like that there.
yeah.
Who wants to hear it but us,
Yeah. Now I want to continue the analogy of the program to keep us thinking along that line. All right, so what do you notice happens when you're running a program on a computer for maybe a year or two? What normally happens by the program designers? What you get? You get a little message that they have an update, right?
Of course.
They're not changing the program, you know. They're responding to the challenges out there and give you an update. So what you might find now is you might get a Black History Month update in the curriculum, or a Black Lives Matter update, or a DEIJ update, but at the same program you're working with.
It's true. It's
It's
So,
appeasing
exactly
us.
what
It
is
appeases
happening.
us, right?
It's
so
exactly what is
the
happening.
program hasn't changed, you know. Notice there's no fundamental root and branch sea change response to the curriculum to say it is not doing what it's supposed to do. What you get is like any other computer program. You get
Mhm.
Windows 5, then you get Windows 7, then you get Windows 10, you get Apple iOS this, you get this, that, constant update, but at the same machine, the same program. Nobody changes the program. And the program had to change, you know. Everything relies on the program running the way it is. So every decision is, what can I do to the program to bring it up to the time, but not change the program? Just so we get the updates. So some of the questions we need to ask is, are we, in order to respond, which is no, I know where Judy is going with this, how do we respond?
Mhm.
Are we reprogramming? Are we deprogramming? Are we unprogramming? It's all different approaches to the same issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are we ditching the program altogether, which is to disprogram? I'm nowhere near it. We're not using it at all. Yeah. All of these represents different responses, and we cannot allow that to be defined by anyone else. And most times the narrative is still defined by the people who created the first program. And by the time you start off with something as, let's say, as I'd say confronting, I'd say Black Lives Matter, by the time it's finished, it ends up as DEIJ. Because it get they just use it to update the curriculum and update what we're doing. It's not leading to the radical change that people are seeking.
Yeah.
They find a way to not change the program, because similar thing happens, in many organizations that run software. You have a set of programmers. They're trained to they write the computer, they write the program in a particular language and structure. And you go to them and say, hey, this thing not working how I want it to do. And they'll sit in their meetings and figure out a way to make the same program that they have do what you ask. And they'll maybe tell you that it cannot do this particular thing, but it can do these 5 things. And you have to accept it, because guess what? They never come to you and say, I'm going to change the program. So, as we talk about it, it's just important that we understand that we're fighting a big machinery that is unwilling to change. And we have people on even our side who will fight to defend the machinery.
Yes.
To keep it in that way, because in their way, they think they believe that they can reprogram it. Yeah.
I think they're just comfortable in the system.
Yeah, they are.
They just become complacent in there, and they don't want the change. They're more afraid of change than they are of just, there's a saying, the enemy is more comfortable than the one you don't.
So they become gatekeepers and so on. Guys, we're gonna have to close off. No, but we want to give everyone an update of what is gonna happen next week. So we're going to tap into some of the features of this Black history, the Black history of people, to look at what are some of the mental issues that carry over into our kids when, for example, from slavery caused some things to happen. It's not just the physical brutality, but the mental part of it, and
the trauma.
Yeah, the trauma part of it. So we're going to talk about that next week when we come back on with another episode of EduTALK. Dr. Barker, just 2 seconds, round us up, and we
no 2 seconds. I have no 2 second comment. I'm not going to love that last 2 seconds, yeah.
Judy?
I was just gonna say that one of the upgrades as well, I forgot to mention it, is it's not even an upgrade. This was more a rebranding of the idea of culturally responsive teaching. I coined my own one, which is culturally responsive leading, which is more the way that I like to be a leader. But when you look at the way that this is how they end up starting off with something that needs to be done, and end up back with something that you say, okay, this is a great thing. But in reality, it's just designed to fit back into the system. Because, the way they define it is almost, if you read it, you'll go, but that's actually just teaching.
Yeah.
I mean, you have a group of children in front of you. Yeah. And as a teacher, if they're all coming from different backgrounds, different ethnicity, different histories, as a teacher, in order for you to reach them and motivate them, you need to understand that and teach in such a way that they all feel included. You need to teach in a way that recognizes and celebrates and acknowledges and values what they bring to the classroom. Yeah. And in order for them to flourish, you have to do the things that make them flourish. And so culturally responsive teaching is not anything different from just teaching. It's just teaching. The best analogy is a gardener having a garden with a lot of different flowers. If you do the same thing to all of them, not some will grow and some won't.
Yeah, it's true.
And the method that he uses, if he uses a one method, only the ones that benefit from the, let's say, the fertilizer or that he uses will be the one that flourish. Everything else will just not flourish. For him to be successful as a gardener or a woman, if it's a woman gardener, you have to know what each plant wants. And you know the kind of soil they like. You like the temperature that they like. Some need to be in the greenhouse. Some need to be planted in spring. Some need to be planted at a different time. Some needed water on the leaves, and some need it at the roots. Some need a lot of water. So this is responsive, culturally responsive. This is what a gardener does in a garden for them to all benefit in their own way.
So, you just said for them all to benefit. The society in which we're in that is repressive and suppressive of certain groups does not start from that place.
That's the point.
That is not the intention that they all be successful. And when they're unsuccessful, they blame the child. And now they put them in an IEP class or a SETS class and say something is wrong with them. They do not take responsibility.
Well, what would you do? What would you do when if you're in a garden and you don't know how? That's the first thing. You don't understand a particular plant. What do you call it? You call it weed. So you try to get rid of it.
It's true.
The rubbers when I around for that one. And you don't understand the plant, right?
Yeah.
You just don't. So this is in every situation we face. There's a simple example in life that explains it. And
well, in that particular instance, it's ignorance. That gardener is ignorant because he doesn't appreciate and recognize the value of that plant that he's naming a weed. And that teacher that is not educated in the way that they should before getting in front of the classroom doesn't understand that the teaching basics that you're saying is something that they should be applying because they think something is wrong with the child. It's even more than culturally responsive education. What's the difference between that and differentiated instruction? I mean, that's all it is. It's all the same thing.
Just good teaching.
Good teaching is good
teaching. Is just good teaching. That's it. There's no need to give it a name. We give it names because it helps us to feel better about ourselves. But a good teacher does these things without knowing what it's called.
It's true. Very, very true.
Yeah, man. All right. Yeah, man.
Yeah, so next week we'll explore. We'll continue. We'll continue with the third part of Reconstructing Black History. All right, Dr. Barker, enjoy the week. Enjoy the week, Mrs. Dyce. And viewers, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Subscribe to educationsolutionsinternational.org. Also, stay tuned. This Wednesday will be Dr. Barker's session on ChatGPT. ChatGPT, the AI system, is really, really fascinating presentation that he has coming up on Wednesday. I can't wait to get it out there and myself.
The good thing is, that's a good. I've had a chat about it. It's called ChatGPT. Let's chat about it, right? And let it to be normal conversation, and then people go away and explore and learn. Use it. That's the key to it.
Yeah, I love it. Love it. All right, everybody, enjoy your week. I hope you learned something and just contribute to something in somebody's life this week. Have a great week. Bye, everybody. See you next week. Talk soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.